The Sisters Saving Sisters Beyond the Mask campaign is a project of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Delaware Chapter. Made possible by Newcastle County CARES Act funding, the state of Delaware, and AARP Delaware sponsorship, our campaign is by Black women for Black women. Of course, we're all family, so everyone is invited. Welcome. I'm Ray Jones Avery, president of NCBW Delaware Chapter. Sisters Saving Sisters acknowledges the unique lived conditions of Black women and our families along our journey for racial of 100 Black Women. Delaware Chapter is a nonprofit membership organization affiliated with 61 chapters throughout the United States. We advocate as influencers in the policy arena for gender equity and resources in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. Our vision is for Black women and girls to live in a world where socioeconomic inequity simply does not exist. When the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic, the Delaware chapter activated strategies to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Our phenomenal group of Black women physicians, who are members of the National Medical Association, answered our call to guide and inform us. We are so grateful to our sister docs, the Colored COVID Commission. A mere thank you is simply inadequate. Let's face it, messengers matter. Women are on the front lines. Far too many women in the food, sanitation, education, healthcare, poultry, personal services, and other industries are unable to shelter in. 82% of Black women in Delaware are key family breadwinners. We are daughters, sisters, caregivers, teachers, wives, counselors, ministers, healthcare personnel, and so much more. There's no denying 2020 has been a tough year of protests, never-ending political battles, and a global pandemic that continues to rage across Delaware and the nation. New cases are skyrocketing and hospital capacity is stressed. Black Americans remain almost 4 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID and almost 3 times more likely to die from it. And we ask ourselves, how long can we hang on? And where can I find a moment to exhale? The National Coalition of 100 Black Women encourages you to take a breath, take a break, find your center, recharge, and renew. Please go to www.beyondthemask.info to find resources to help make informed decisions for ourselves and our families. We owe it to ourselves. Keep doing what you're doing right now. Keep those masks up. Take time to get the facts, think choices through, and here's our love letter to you.
Dear Black America, we love you. We affirm that Black lives matter. And as Black health professionals, we have a higher calling to stand for racial justice and to fight for health equity. In the spirit of unconditional love for every single Black American, we have locked arms in an initiative to place the health and safety of our community at the heart of the national conversation about COVID-19. Respect for our Black bodies and our Black lives must be a core value for those who are working to find the vaccine for this virus that has already taken so many of our loved ones. Our colleagues across healthcare know that we are urging our community to take safe and effective vaccines once available. However, for this to be successful, they must do more to earn your trust now and in the future. We are on the front lines in care delivery and in key decision-making roles, from the lab to the clinic to the virtual boardroom. We urge you to hold us accountable. Please wear your masks, continue social distancing, hand washing, and avoiding indoor events until vaccines are widely available. With the holidays around the corner, We want nothing more than to break bread with our loved ones. But tradition cannot stand in the way of our health. We also ask you to join us in participating in clinical trials and taking a vaccine once it's proven safe and effective. We know that our collective role in helping to create a vaccine that works for Black people and that we trust has an impact on our very survival. Please visit blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org/loveletter to learn more about the work we are doing to keep our beloved community safe. We will keep you in our hearts while we work to create a world that is healthier and more just than the one we know today. Love, America's Black doctors and nurses. Dear Black America,
How beautiful was that? Thank you, Dr. Rice, for authorizing us to use that. Now let's do a quick poll. Let's do a quick poll to see what's on your minds right now. Don't overthink it. We're going to give you 1 minute to answer a couple of questions. Top of mind responses. You may need to scroll down. Depends on what kind of device that you are using. But we're going to do a quick poll to see what's on your minds now, and then we'll poll you again towards the end of this conversation. Again, you may need to pull the bar down, the gray bar down on the right to get to the third question. When you're finished, hit submit. A few more seconds and we'll move forward. This is truly a collective effort. And so we'd also like to acknowledge we are going to be joined by Cassandra Coates Johnson, Associate Deputy Director for the Delaware Division of Public Health in the Department of Health and Social Services for the state of Delaware. Cassandra Johnson has been on the front line since day one. Dr. Doris Griffin, First Vice President of the Delaware Chapter of the National Coalition, Tamara Smith and Monica Porter, our NCBW program co-chairs, are serving as chat moderators. So put your questions in the chat for the community conversation segment. And also, please share out that you are on this most essential conversation right now. Put the YouTube link in the chat so others may join in. So let's close this poll. So you can see the real-time responses. Interesting. And we will poll you again. I'm thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Joan F. Coker. Dr. Joan F. Coker, our moderator. Dr. Coker, while running a full-time medical practice, still finds time to be a servant leader in the state of Delaware. Dr. Coker serves as president of the Wilmington, Delaware chapter of the Links. She's the immediate past president and now the vice president for Coumba Academy School Board. Dr. Coker has been central to the Testing for America initiative at Delaware State University. She's a member of the Divine Nine who has joined us in full force, and most importantly, she is the middle daughter. And if you study science, the middle child has a very special role. Dr. Coker is the middle daughter of Larry and BB Ross Coker. Joan F. Coker, that F stands for fire. Please send her some positive energy. Thank you, Dr. Coker, for moderating this most essential conversation.
Oh, thank you, Ray. Thank you for having this. Thank you to the coalition for finding it necessary to have this courageous conversation. We are delighted to join you this afternoon. We're a little emotional about it. I think as African-American women in healthcare, it is a very emotional time, but we are delighted to be here. Special thanks to Dr. Rattay and the Department of Public Health, who helped us to get our vaccines as frontline physicians. Thank you for helping us get the vaccines so that we could be ready for this conversation today. And I will just say at the outset, some of us are in private practice while others are in academic medicine. So we'd like to acknowledge that our views may not reflect the views of our parent organizations. So understand that. So what I want everybody to do is take copious notes, check over those notes with your primary care physician, or many of you may need to check in with your allergist or cardiologist or pulmonologist, whomever you deem trustworthy. You may need to check in with your pastor, because we appreciate the clergy at a time like this. So I see many of you are populating questions into the chat already. We are going to have a question and answer period at the end. So let's get started. I am one of the panelists. I am an ear, nose, and throat, head and neck surgeon right here in Wilmington, Delaware. Proud graduate of Tuskegee University. It was Institute when I was there. I also did my surgical internship with Dr. Wayne Frederick at Howard University, and at King Drew Medical Center, I did my residency. I find those things to be important because the tie that binds those three sites is that community is whom you're going to look out for. That's who you stand for, that's who you speak up for, and that's what we're going to do today. You have my word that we have done our research, we have done our homework, and we are delighted to have a conversation with you. So let's get started with the panel. Let's start with Dr. Carole Guy. Dr. Guy, welcome.
Thank you, Joan. Good afternoon, everyone, and a great big thanks of gratitude to the Newcastle County Coalition of 100 Black Women for all the great work that you are doing. I'm a member of the First State National Medical Association. I'm Dr. Carole Guy, and I'm here because Black health matters. So it's critical that COVID-19 vaccine is distributed equitably in our first state of Delaware, where I reside, in Philadelphia, where I grew up, at the great HBCU of Howard University, where I was educated. It's important that equitable distribution occurs throughout the United States. In the first COVID-19 hotspot of New York City, where my youngest son resides, and the present hotspot of Houston, Texas, where my oldest son resides with my daughter-in-law and my beautiful granddaughter, over in Tokyo, where my middle son resides, and they are wearing masks. It's the norm in Tokyo. And then across the diaspora in Africa, where my husband was born. Over 300,000 people have died, as we know, in the United States. A horrible statistic, a grim statistic. And as we know, Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately infected and affected by this COVID-19 scourge. Hopefully, after we had this discussion during this town hall, we hope that the scientific information we provide will help you to make some healthy decisions to put your arms up and get vaccinated. I saw the polling, 47% taking, 42% undecided, 17% not taking. So we hope that with scientific information, we can improve some of those numbers. I'm a pulmonologist or a lung doctor, and I've had the privilege to take care of the lung health of many of you. And during that time, I've been able to educate you about other older vaccines for the past 3 decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guy, and welcome. Dr. Marshala Lee.
Hello, my name is Dr. Marshala Lee. I am a family medicine physician and public health researcher at Christiana Care. I attended college, undergrad, bachelor's in chemistry, Tougaloo College, which is a small HBCU in Mississippi, produces 50% of the Black doctors and lawyers in Mississippi. I went to medical school at Brown, completed family medicine residency training at University of Maryland, and I completed my master's in public health at Harvard, and also had a concentration in minority health policy. It is indeed an honor to be here, being able to advocate for you. Each day I wake up mourning for the more than 300,000 lives that have been lost to COVID, and it really hurts my heart that a large number of them are Black and brown people. So I hope that the information that we provide to you today will equip you with the tools to make informed decisions and better protect you and your family. Thank you.
Perfect. Welcome, Dr. Lee. We'll now move to Dr. Shauna McIntosh. Camera on, Dr. McIntosh. There we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our panel. We are all so super excited about sharing information with you about all the research that we've done and all the panels we've been sitting on and conversations we've been a part of. We just want to empower our sisters and brothers so that the past will not be repeated, where we are left behind and where the health disparities grow larger and larger. I'm an OBGYN. I work for St. Francis Hospital, and I'm also the president of the National Medical Association First State Chapter here in Delaware. And I am looking forward to your questions and hoping that we can increase the acceptance rate of this immunization, which is a powerful tool in helping to close our disparity gap.
Thank you, Dr. McIntosh, and welcome. Dr. Scantlebury.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on today. I am excited to be part of this panel. I am a transplant surgeon and now retired, but also a member of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, as well as a member of our First State National Medical Association right here in Delaware. So I am part of this panel and look forward to having your questions and answering and delivering information so that we can have your trust once we present the science and the data, to have you at least begin to consider that there are advantages to having this vaccine and to reduce our risk of death from this extravaganza of our terrible pandemic of COVID-19. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Scantlebury, for joining us. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Cydney Teal.
Hi, hello, everyone.
Camera, Dr. Teal.
I'm on. Thank you. Hi. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Cooker said, my name is Dr. Cydney Teal. I am the chair of Department of Family and Community Medicine at Christiana Care. And I really want to thank everyone for taking their time this afternoon. I really am deeply grateful to the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, as well as Newcastle County and the CARES Act Task Force for really understanding the importance of this topic and topics like this. Our job today really is to dispel the myths, answer your questions, and as we saw in the chat and in the survey, we really want to make sure that you can make informed decisions about your health, about the vaccine, and then tell a friend, because we know that with us starting today, we're going to start a chain of positivity about the vaccine and really, again, dispel those myths out in our communities. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So that is our panel. So guess what time it is? It's time to get started. Let's take it from the top. They call this Operation Warp Speed, which in my opinion is not the right topic. It creates anxiety just saying it. So Dr. Guy, tell us about Warp Speed, and were there any corners cut? Please make us more comfortable with the title Warp Speed.
Right. So I'm going to try to make us more comfortable with this title, Warp Speed, which lacks some sensitivity because we know Warp Speed is like from Star Trek. Warp Speed is quite fast. So first, let's put it in some perspective. It took 105 years to develop a vaccine for typhoid. After the discovery of the microbiological cause, it took 92 years to develop the Haemophilus influenza vaccine. It took 89 years to develop polio, 47 years to develop measles, 42 years to develop hepatitis B, 16 years to develop hepatitis B, and a long 89 years to develop pertussis vaccine. So it takes a long time typically to develop vaccines. What the federal government has done, they created Operation Warp Speed because we're in pandemic times. The name is the problem, not what actually is occurring. The name may give some people vaccine hesitancy. I want to dispel that when I clarify what Operation Warp Speed is. So it's a partnership between components of the Department of Health and Human Services, including the CDC, National Institutes of Health, and the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, and the Department of Defense. Operation Warp Speed engages with private firms and other federal agencies with the goal of producing and distributing 300 million doses of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine by January 2021. And as we know, there's over 331 million of us living here in the United States. It also does broader countermeasures and strategies, which include development, manufacturing, and distribution of not only vaccine, but therapeutics and diagnostics. So what Operation Warp Speed did, they looked at over 100 promising vaccine candidates when they first formed this Operation Warp Speed initiative. And they whittled it down to 8 vaccine candidates. And they invested $10 billion. So they funded it so we can get to solutions. Mm-hmm. So far, the 2 vaccine candidates have now received an emergency use authorization. And I'm going to explain what an emergency use authorization is. But we needed investment. So there's 2 messenger RNA vaccines, the one from Pfizer, BioNTech, and the one from Moderna, which now are already, well, Moderna will be distributing probably tomorrow, but the other one, Pfizer, has already been distributed, and that's what we received. So there was 1.95 billion pledged for purchase and distribution of 100 million doses of Pfizer, BioNTech, and now it has an emergency use authorization. There was $955 million to support development of Moderna's messenger RNA vaccine candidate, and another $1.5 billion to support large-scale manufacturing and distribution of the candidate vaccine, which just received an emergency use authorization from the FDA. So as I said, this name, Operation Warp Speed, that may cause some hesitancy. There was no skipping of steps. We did not skip steps. The science was solid. And I'm going to explain some of the science too that actually existed before Operation Warp Speed. There have previously been what we call messenger RNA platforms. And these 2 first vaccine candidates, which have received an emergency use authorization, they use messenger RNA platforms, which have been created in the 90s. So these platforms have been in existence for about 30 years. And although these will be the first messenger RNA to be approved and used in humans, due to the concept also of translational research, which is getting new vaccines or new therapeutics for what we call the bench scientists, like in preclinical or animal trials, to the bedside or to the population in the case of vaccines. Translational research. When I first went to med school that many years ago, it did not exist. I did some training in epidemiology at University of Pennsylvania mid and way far into my career in the 2000s, when those centers were being built in the early 2000s, translational research. So doctors who graduate now, they didn't know that it did not exist. So this translational research actually helped us when this pandemic came about. So that was nothing to do with Operation Warp Speed. It was already in existence prior to the science. So that when scientists around the world developed, understood more things about this coronavirus or this SARS-CoV-2, as it's called, which causes COVID-19, they were able to share their information globally. For example, when the genome was worked out in January, it was shared from Chinese scientists around the world so the scientists could immediately get to work on dealing with this virus. The genome tells you what a virus does. It's what am I made of? So our human genomes say how I act. So the virus genomes say, what are my proteins? What makes me infected? So immediately scientists around the world through translational research went to work. Now, no steps were skipped in the development of these messenger RNA vaccines, and none will be skipped with ongoing the other 8, total eight vaccine candidates, which are being infused with billions of dollars from the federal government. And because they had so much money, they were able actually to pay for or fund the studies with large numbers of trial participants. It costs a lot of money to recruit trial participants. It's very expensive. And they also were able to do it not just here in the United States, but globally, so that the first vaccine candidate to receive the emergency use authorization, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is a messenger RNA vaccine, has over 45,000 participants in the phase 3 or clinical efficacy part of the trial. We'll be discussing more about that later in the presentation. And the one that was just approved, Moderna, is also a messenger RNA, and it had over 30,000 participants in the phase 3 trial. So there were thousands of participants. And all of these, all the vaccine candidates, FDA has refined the regulations. They have to move through preclinical to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial. What is different is that this is being done simultaneously rather than as a separate step. As a separate step, this would not be good for our health. We're in a pandemic. We've lost over 300,000 people in the United States, and doing it step by step is very slow and takes years and years even to move between one step and the next. So more people would die. So they have funding, and also because we're in a pandemic, this is going simultaneously between the phases. So what is the regulations? The FDA is regulating this process, the emergency use authorization. What is it? I wanted to investigate it too before I took my vaccine. So I investigated and researched it. Emergency use authorization was added to FDA authority by the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Reauthorization Act of 2013. It authorizes the FDA to facilitate availability of an unapproved product, such as a vaccine during a state of emergency, such as the public health COVID-19 pandemic, when no adequate other approved product is available. So our Secretary of State of the HHS, Alex Azar, declared a public health emergency on January 31st, 2020, almost a year ago. He retroacted it to January 27, 2020, so that the FDA would be able to use this to issue an emergency use authorization. And that's why we have these 2 candidate vaccines now. The Vaccines and Biologics Products Advisory Committee reviews all applications for emergency use authorization, and it makes recommendations to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, who makes the final decision with multiple regulatory steps. The Vaccines and Biologics Products Advisory Committee has representatives from academia, infectious disease, the pharmaceutical industry, the federal government, the National Institutes of Health, translational science, and a legal consumer. And the FDA has now determined that they made rules and guidelines around how we do this emergency use authorization. For one, they determined after much scientific discussion that you have to have at least 2 months to make application to an emergency use authorization. We have to observe the candidate vaccine, which happened with these 2 vaccines, for at least a period of 2 months. And you will need to have ongoing follow-up, what we call phase 4, post-marketing, will have to occur at any emergency use authorization vaccine for up to 2 years at the minimum. So, and also we are following internal regulation boards and committees to pause or discontinue during the development of these vaccine candidates for any safety concerns which we see. We already know, and I'm going to clarify this for folks, that AstraZeneca, which has not yet been approved for an EUA, they have a viral vector COVID-19 vaccine trial. It was paused. So we are paying attention. Steps are not being skipped. It was paused briefly on September 6th for safety concerns. It was resumed actually in other parts of the world quicker than in the United States. It was resumed in the United States about a month and a half later on October 23rd, 2020, after further review. One patient developed a problem, and they looked at it further, and it was deemed it was okay to continue the research. So the speed of development, manufacturing, and distribution of these now emergency authorized use 2 messenger RNA vaccine in the past 2 weeks has been a very coordinated and regulated process despite the speed, because as we said, this is a pandemic. We have lost 300,000 lives in the United States, and Black and brown people have been disproportionately affected. So we need a tool in our armamentarium, which these vaccines will provide, to assist with this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guy. I think those are important points because I think what everybody gets so upset about is what steps were skipped. And thank you for letting us know that the science has been ongoing for years and that we did not skip on the science. And Dr. Scantlebury, now I'm glad you joined us. We want to talk about the vendors, because for most of us as African Americans and otherwise, the question becomes, is there one that's better than the other? So we've got Moderna, we've got Pfizer. So let's focus on those two. Can you talk about whether one is better than the other, especially for folks of color?
Thank you, Dr. Coker. Thank you, Dr. Guy, for delivering such important information. But you have to realize that once this pandemic started in March and was recognized, both Pfizer and Moderna made smart moves to use this brand new technique of mRNA. And mRNA technology, as we heard, had been around for many years. Actually, Moderna is a smaller biotech company and have been working with mRNA technology for many years also, much longer than Pfizer. Pfizer actually embarked on a partnership with a small German company called BioNTech, which did the research with mRNA, while Moderna had been using it within their own technology for a very long time. The technology used to make the vaccine by both Pfizer and Moderna is quite similar. And what the vaccine consists of is taking the spike protein that's encoded into the mRNA. The mRNA is then encased in what's called nanoproteins, nanolipids, and this is then presented to our own cells. And the component, both the mRNA delivers genetic information against the COVID-19 so that our own cells can then make these antibodies. And this is a similar technique for both Moderna and Pfizer in terms of how this virus is encoded, how it's delivered. And so they're both acceptable ways of mRNA delivery of the virus. So from that standpoint, they're quite similar. The differences boils down to, yes, this vaccine was tested in phase 3 trials in Pfizer for 16 years and older. And Moderna took theirs back a little bit so that it's 18 years and over for the vaccine trials, phase 3. We will hear about efficacy from Dr. Lee later on about how these vaccines vary in the efficacy, but they both require 2 doses. The same dose of 30 micrograms delivered in 2 separate doses. For Moderna, it's 28 days apart, and for Pfizer, it's 21 days apart. And actually, the response on the second dose of the virus, they seem to be greater and have more side effects on the second time around. But the delivery of the vaccine for Pfizer is a little bit more difficult because it requires a minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit in order to be stored. And then once it's placed in the refrigerator, it's only good for 5 days. Moderna, on the other hand, is frozen at normal freezer temperatures, such as minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit, and can last in the refrigerator for up to 30 days. And so when we think about our communities and smaller communities and delivering this virus to the mass number of people who need it, outside of academic centers which have these huge freezers that Pfizer will require, Moderna becomes a much more better possibility as far as delivering the virus to smaller areas and being able to use it in a refrigerator and in terms of storage. But the side effects we will talk about later on are pretty much the same. Many of us had our vaccines a couple of days ago. Some of us had soreness in the arm, at the site, some maybe a headache, some fatigue. But basically, the way the virus is delivered from both companies and the efficacy as far as the trials, we know there were about 40,000 people in each trial, and there's 95 to 94.1% efficacy in terms of its effectiveness with Moderna and 95% with Pfizer. So both drugs are available, they've been proven, and we'll hear a little bit more about the efficacy moving on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scantlebury. So I'm glad you brought that up. And we're going to use some medical terms like efficacy. And I'm only saying that because that's what the news and the cable outlets use. So I want us to understand what efficacy means. So Dr. Lee, talk to us about the efficacy of these two vaccines.
Yes. So both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines have shown astonishing and essentially equivalent degrees of efficacy. Efficacy specifically applies to how well a vaccine works in a clinical trial. It refers to the vaccine's ability to prevent symptomatic disease, which is different than reducing asymptomatic infection. It's not yet known if either prevents asymptomatic infection, nor is it known if vaccinated people can transmit the virus if they do become infected but don't show symptoms. These are the type of things that the clinical trials are continuing to research at this time. Most importantly, we want to reduce the number of symptomatic infection, which causes disease and hospitalization. And thankfully, both vaccines are effective with reducing symptomatic infection. The Pfizer vaccine showed an efficacy of 95% at preventing symptomatic infection, which helps people stay out the hospital. That's more than twice the effectiveness of the annual flu shot, which typically carries a 40 to 60% efficacy rate. The vaccine appeared to be almost equally protective across age groups and racial and ethnic groups. The Moderna vaccine was 94.1% effective at preventing symptomatic COVID-19, measured starting 14 days after the second dose. The vaccine appeared to be almost equally protective across age groups and racial and ethnic groups. So that means that both vaccines were practically the same. There was a good representation of African American and racial ethnic groups in both the Moderna and Pfizer trials. African Americans typically tend to be underrepresented in clinical trials for a number of reasons. In general, African Americans typically make up about 5% of the participants in U.S. clinical trials, although we represent 13% of the U.S. population. Moderna recruited a total of 30,000 participants. And of those 30,000 participants, 11,000 were people of color. 20% were Hispanic or Latinx, and 10% were Black. Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine recruited 43,000 participants and also included diverse representation of ethnic groups. But they did have a smaller representation of Hispanic and Latin individuals from Latinx backgrounds, with 13% Hispanic and Latinx and 10% Black individuals. So both vaccine trials had equal numbers of African-American Black representation in their trials. So we know that we were well represented in the study. So I'm happy to know that the efficacy among African Americans is equal to the other populations, and both vaccines are safe and effective for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. So far, let's just talk about real quickly what we've learned. One, this isn't pixie dust. Okay, so the vaccine is not pixie dust in the sense that you get it, you take the vaccine, number one, and number two, are you going to be cured of COVID? Not necessarily. What you can hope for is that you will not get severe disease. They are not injecting a live virus in you. Let's be real clear on that. This is not a live virus injection. So A, you won't be cured, but the likelihood that you'll need a ventilator, the likelihood that you'll get severe disease is reduced by over 90% with both vaccines. Now, we're going to fight to get you in line for this vaccine. I'll say that one more time. As physicians of color, we are fighting for equity and inclusion in vaccination. So when we talk about distribution, which Dr. Teal is popping on to talk about, we want to make sure if we get you a spot in line, that you show up to the line. So we're going to continue with the science, and then we're going to get to the psychosocial aspects of this. Dr. Teal, thank you for joining us. Can you talk to us a little bit about the equitable distribution and the hopes of distribution with these vaccines?
Sure. Thanks very much, Dr. Coker. Let's just start sort of high level and start with sort of going from the nationwide standpoint and then down to drilling down into Delaware. So, nationwide and statewide distribution really depends on emergency use authorization, which you've already heard about today, from federal agencies such as the CDC and the FDA. And there's been a lot of collaboration within the state of Delaware between the CDC, Health and Human Services, specifically Region 3 Vaccine Task Force and Delaware DPH, because we wouldn't be able to do this without them. So for today, we're going to share, and I'm going to share what we know. Lots of numbers thrown around in terms of how much vaccine, where's it going, allocation and the like. But I'll tell you what we know as of today. So you had heard about from Dr. Guy about 300 million doses. What we know as of right now is that there is a goal to have 20 million doses, 20 million people vaccinated by the year's end. So obviously in the next couple of weeks. With emergency use authorization for Pfizer, Pfizer shipped out 2 million doses to the states this past week, so a week ago. The Department of Public Health here in Delaware had pre-ordered, very, very smartly pre-ordered 8,775 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And this past week, 975 of those doses arrived Monday and that were distributed to the different health centers, health systems and long-term care facilities. The remaining 7,800 doses arrived on or around Wednesday of this past week, and they're expected to be distributed in the next week or two. So now, with emergency use authorization of Moderna now approved, it's estimated that 5.9 million doses of Moderna will be shipped to about 64 states this upcoming week. And the Department of Public Health is expecting 16,700 doses of Moderna in the upcoming weeks to be shipped here to Delaware. So what about distribution? Well, this is all dependent on the allotment to the state and how we prioritize who's getting the vaccine first. And as you highlighted, Dr. Coker, a number of us on this call were early recipients of the vaccine, those first 975 doses, because you're healthcare workers and you're providing direct patient care. And so I'm going to go through the multi-phases that exist for not just the state of Delaware, but across the country, of how we are making sure that we are prioritizing those who need to get this vaccine first. Phase 1A includes all healthcare workers. And let me define healthcare workers. These are people who are patient-facing, meaning that they deliver direct patient care, and those who support those who, who deliver direct patient care. So nurses, physicians, advanced practice clinicians, respiratory therapists, home health aides, those who work like OR techs, those who are transporters. So those are the people who are being prioritized in phase 1A. In addition, the long-term care residents and their staff are also being prioritized. EMS, first responders, are also being prioritized. So again, we're talking about those who really are at the sharpest end of the tool, if you will, when it comes to exposure and risk for getting the infection. Phase 1B is expected to kick in on or around early 2021, so somewhere between January, February 2021. And this next phase will include additional high-risk essential non-healthcare workers. So who do we mean when we say those folks? We're talking about police, fire, food processing, utility workers, education, homeless shelters, federally qualified healthcare centers. So that would be that next priority population that would be receiving the vaccination. Phase 1C would then include those who are over the age of 65 and those with chronic medical conditions, as well as public health workers. And then we go into phase 2. Phase 2 is anticipated between March, early spring, March 2021, and this would include the moderately at risk for getting COVID. And this would include those who are also limited to getting routine vaccine services. And then phase 3 is anticipated late spring, early summer 2021. And this is when we would see the general public receiving the vaccination. And in addition to the general public, we would also have focus on pharmacies, grocers, food service as well. So multi-phases, what's really important to know is that the phases are going to overlap. So in other words, the intention is to continue as we get more and more people in each one of the phases vaccinated. The next phase will then, kick into play. So there isn't going to be sort of a stop-start date. There will be sort of continuous increasing to the number of people who will be able to get the vaccination. One of the things I want to make sure everyone knows about in terms of understanding this particular schedule, which has changed and has been modified, there is a resource, and that resource is the COVID vaccination playbook, and it is on the state of Delaware website. So important if people want to have more information or want to know a little bit more about specifically that what's going on and what phase we're in. And then you'd ask the question about equity. And I think one of the things that's really important is that there has been a very heightened awareness and commitment by the federal government, DPH, healthcare systems, and other community organizations to ensure that we get the vaccines to the highest risk and most vulnerable populations. And really to help to achieve this, and what we're hoping will occur relatively soon, because now that Moderna has been authorized and the stipulations for freezing requirements as well as storage requirements are not as onerous as they are for Pfizer. You know, DPH is asking for private physician practices, clinical practices to also be vaccinator sites. So as we get into those next phases, we're going to have the opportunity, or it is anticipated to have the opportunity, that private practices will be able to not only sign up, they'll receive the vaccine, they'll be able to vaccinate their patient population. So we really are hoping that there'll be broad, diffuse ability for everyone to get the vaccine, you know, when they want it, and how in the comfort of their private practice provider or their provider's offices.
Thank you, Dr. Teal. I just want to take a moment and say it is extraordinary that Dr. Teal has this amount of information, because typically we are not at the table for these discussions. So thank you, Dr. Teal, for not just, you know, being at the table, but leaning in on our behalf. And I can't tell you, that is a wealth of information, ladies and gentlemen. So many of you have talked about side effects. And so Dr. Scantlebury is going to join me, and we're going to talk about some of these side effects. Let's talk about the hot topic right now, and that is anaphylaxis. That's a big word, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people. So many of you know I do a lot of allergy in the state of Delaware. So we talk about anaphylaxis in terms of chest tightness, shortness of breath, full body rash. My tongue feels like it's swelling. My lips feel like it's swelling. Now, if you live in Delaware, you know, I know a lot of you have severe allergies, and I just want to put you in a bubble and run you around town. So don't think just because you have an EpiPen for your peanut allergy, your bee stings, your dust, your dogs, your cats, your horses, your mice, that you are one of those that, whoa, I can't get this. No, what they're saying about anaphylaxis and side effects is those that have had a reaction to a vaccine or an injectable in the past. Those are the ones that we want to look at closely, consider everything, see if we can figure out exactly what part of that vaccine you were allergic to, and then work it from that angle. So those of you will be on the sidelines. But if you have severe allergies, even those that require immunotherapy, and I'm talking about a shot once a week, a shot once a month, sublingual immunotherapy. Joan, I take drops. I put drops under my tongue. I get it. We've got allergies. That is not you. Okay, that is not you. Certainly you want to check with your allergist. You want to talk with your primary care provider. You want to run this pass up and down the chart. And you want to make sure that when you go to a facility for your vaccine, I'm gonna say this one more time, you want to make sure wherever you go, if you do have severe allergies requiring the use of an EpiPen, such as bee stings, peanuts, crabs, shellfish, you know, I'm very sad that you have a crab allergy, because yeah, well, I'm right here in Delaware. You get what I'm saying. But let's be clear. You want to be at a facility that is ready to manage you. And when I say ready to manage you, I mean, they've got oxygen. They have the ability to intubate. They have a crash cart. They have IV access. They know how to manage anaphylaxis. All right. So let's be abundantly clear. Everybody with allergies, you don't sit on the sideline simply because you have allergies. If you've had an anaphylactic reaction to a vaccine in the past, we're going to look at the ingredients of our vaccine. We're going to look at what you were allergic to in the past, and we're going to figure out how we can mitigate that risk to you. But right now, you are not getting the vaccine. And Dr. Scantlebury, you want to talk about some of the other more typical reactions with the
Yeah.
vaccine?
Absolutely. And as Dr. Coker said, it also includes if you have an allergy to medication or antibiotics, that doesn't count. And so it's important to realize you need to get this vaccine. We had our shots just a few days ago, our vaccines, and the most common symptoms are usually pain at the site and swelling at the injection site. You can also get a headache, maybe some fatigue, but generally some people may get a fever, but not too many. Muscle aches from any kind of any vaccine, the typical symptoms you would even expect from the flu vaccine. And so it's important to realize that this is a vaccine. The symptoms that come forth is because your body is developing an immune response to the virus. So it's working. It's not like you're not getting the viral infection. You're not getting COVID. This vaccine does not give you COVID. So it's important to realize that, because what you're getting is just genetic information. There's no live virus, there's no kill virus to worry about. So it's very important. Vaccines are only as good as the vaccination that people receive.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, the reason why we're here today is because we understand why you're hesitant. So everybody on this panel, no one needs to explain their hesitancy to us, because we get it, we live it, we see you, we feel you. So we're going to bring Dr. McIntosh in, because we've gone through the science. Let's now talk about, let me tell you why I'm a little hesitant. Dr. McIntosh, thank you.
Thank you. So the question is, how did we get here? How did we, we've been in this country for hundreds of years, and we do not trust our United States healthcare system. I understand why people are going to be naturally distrustful of the vaccine, because it was promoted by a president who continued to make disparaging remarks about minorities and never seemed to have, or rarely seemed to have, our backs. And here he is saying, I want this vaccine. Then we have Operation Warp Speed passing through the FDA. People are wondering, are they fast tracking this? And is this vaccine going to be effective? Is it going to be safe? Are they once again experimenting on us? So I understand in relationship to the COVID vaccine, why there's so much hesitancy and skepticism. And we are now at the table more than we've ever been in the past. And that's a new idea. That's a new concept, that finally it's not somebody other than us making decisions about health concerns in our communities. Now we're the researchers, we're the nurses, the doctors, we are sitting at the table, we're helping to formulate policy and overseeing research trials, etc. So COVID, let's put that aside for a minute. How did we get here? Because our mistrust has predated this COVID pandemic. And a lot of us would point to the Tuskegee trials. These were conducted between 1932 and 1972. And I know a lot of people think that the trials involved, so sorry, the trials involved, sorry. Sorry, I'm so sorry. The trials involved infecting African-American men with the virus, with the syphilis bacteria, but it actually was not that. It was that they wanted to see what happened if you did not treat people who had the disease. And so they recruited 600 poor sharecropping men from a small county, from a poor county in Alabama, Macon County, and they promised these men hot meals on the treatment days, free medical care, and burial insurance in exchange for being a part of a study. The study initially was supposed to last 6 to 9 months for each of the participants. At the end of that trial, they would get the treatment of the day. And in all fairness to the people who originally designed the trial, there was not a good effective treatment for penicillin at that time. They were using mercury and bismuth, and these were very toxic and they weren't that effective. But that's all we had at that time. So what was the harm in 6 months and 9 months delaying treatment? The men were getting something in exchange. And at the end of the 6 and 9 months, they were going to be offered treatment, and that would be the end of it. Well, what happened was the crash of the market happened. The funding for the trial was withdrawn, and therefore there was no money to pay for the treatment. These men that were enrolled in the study were not told that they were not being treated, and the study just continued to roll on and on and on. There were 600 men recruited for this study. 399 had syphilis during the study, 201 did not. By the end of the trial, there were, let me back up. The people who developed syphilis during the 40 years of this trial were not told that they had developed syphilis. They were lied to. They weren't told if they had syphilis or not. Sometimes the investigators would come into town and inject them with a placebo and say, oh yeah, we're treating you. And this was all done with the blessings of the CDC, the blessings of the NIH. Tuskegee was involved in this. I'm not so sure how much information they were giving to the doctors, the African-American physicians who were part of the trial, but they were also involved in making sure that these men were continued to be studied during the 40 years. So as a result of these awful trials, we had 40 spouses that ended up infected, and we had 19 babies born with syphilis, which is extremely disfiguring and also leads to a lot of mental health challenges and educational disabilities as a result of the infection. So we have these men, they're in the trial, and it's continuing on. No one's being treated. And then in 1943, the government mandated the people who had venereal disease had to be treated. Everyone was getting treated but our men in Tuskegee. 1947, penicillin comes out. It is the standard of care. It is withheld from these men. And when these men went around the investigators to treatment centers that were mostly set up by the public health department in order to help to treat syphilis in the population, these men were blocked from getting medication. They were blocked from having any access. So not only was there a crime of withholding information, they were going out of their way to block these men from being treated. So in the 1960s, when the World Health Organization established the Helsinki Code, which said that you could not subject a human to any kind of experimentation without their express consent. And this was because of all that had happened during the Nazi medical trials. And the world said, we're not letting that happen again. This was atrocious. Everyone turned a blind eye to Tuskegee. No one reevaluated it. Not the people at Tuskegee, not the people at the NIH, not the people at the CDC. No one did. And the trial continued. And then in 1972, one of the researchers from the United Public Health Service was interviewing the participants in the study. And he said, something's not right about this. And he wrote a letter to the CDC and said, this is unethical. These men are not being treated, and we need to do something about it. And the CDC said, we will stop the trial when the last participant has died and been autopsied. And that was their stance on it. The guy then sent a letter to the Associated Press and made it into the Washington Star and also into the New York Times as a front page article. And it was because there was a public outcry of how wrong this was, that it finally caught the attention of the right people in the government, and the trial was stopped that year. By the time the trial was stopped, only 78 of their initial 600 members were alive. And in 1997, when Clinton apologized to the participants for the atrocities of that trial, there were 8 surviving members, and 5 actually were at the White House ceremony. So if that wasn't bad enough, and if that wasn't information enough, our US government was driven by the fact that they wanted to protect their servicemen from getting syphilis and gonorrhea, which was happening during World War II. And they weren't satisfied to know that there was a treatment. They wanted to figure out how to prevent their men from getting it and how to treat it effectively and what would happen if they were treated and were reinfected. Because they did not want to spend military dollars in treatment or losing time because people were sick with these illnesses. So they knew they couldn't carry out an experiment in the US where they infected people with these sexually transmitted diseases. So they exported it, and they sidestepped all the ethical boards, and they sidestepped the informed consent requirements, and they went to Guatemala. And that's where they ended up injecting people or infecting people rather, with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid. And they typically were using prostitutes and have been paying them to sleep with soldiers. They went to facilities that housed a lot of mentally challenged people. They would use them as subjects. This study ran from 1946 to 1948. There were 1,308 subjects, 83 died. They ranged in age from 10 to 72. And the goal was, well, let's see how effective it is. Let's give these are healthy people, give them penicillin. Let's infect them with syphilis or gonorrhea or chancroid, and see if we need to treat them again, or if they get treated, let's reinfect them. It was horrible. The descriptions of how they treated these participants was awful. And these were all done without the knowing consent of the subjects. And a lot of the same investigators that were involved with Tuskegee were also involved with this trial. And there is no paper ever produced with information about this trial. So it was off the radar. And that's why they were able to get away with it. So, and then we go to Henrietta Lacks, who is a young African-American woman in Maryland who died from cervical cancer at 31 years of age. And her cancer cells are still being used today for medical research, and also being used commercially. And because of these cells from her body, we have learned so much about cancer and how cancer works. And we've developed a lot of therapies based on her cell line. And the shame is that a biopsy of her tumor was taken while she was alive and turned over to a researcher who was the one who grew the cells. He's a researcher at Hopkins University. Informed consent was not the standard back in the 1950s when they were treating her, so that's not as egregious. What was awful was that after her death, her family never knew that her cells were being used in this way. Their mother's name was about to be put out there in the public, and it called into question rights around patient privacy, as well as compensation and acknowledgement for the contribution that Henrietta Lacks made to medicine. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the sterilization that went on, the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women and also Native American women. And this went on for 30 to 40 years, starting in 1937, all the way up to the 1970s, where the government decided that we needed to have population control of those who are undesirables. These are people that were too poor, they reproduced too much, they were going to be a drain on our economic stability. And so they were coercing women into being sterilized. They were lying to them about the type of procedure that they were having. They would give the consent or ask for consent in a different language than the women spoke. And so these people were, thousands of women were sterilized. And by the end of the 30-year time period, a third of all Puerto Rican women had been sterilized and 25% of Native Americans on their reservations had been sterilized. And it wasn't until 1975 when Dr. Rodriguez Tria, who had been outspoken against this policy, against the forced sterilization, actually caught the attention of Congress, and a bill was passed, and it's still in play today, where you have to have informed consent in the woman's language. You cannot sterilize people less than 26 years old currently, and 30 years, it's a 30-day waiting period. They were sterilizing women in their teens who never had a chance of ever having children. So we have a long history of doing the wrong thing, and that distrust is there. But what has come out of all these horrible experiments is that we now have the Office of Research, and sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the whole office, but it's there to protect the participants from ever being abused again. We also have the institutional review boards that make sure that there is conformed consent and that it is really informed consent. We have transparency at all levels. We have Black and Brown people at all levels. There is accountability for your data. There's follow-up on the subjects. At Tuskegee, they have the Legacy Museum, which is there so that we never forget what was the experiments that were performed on these young men. We also have at Hopkins, they have the Henrietta Lacks Legacy lecture, which occurs every year, and they are naming a building after her on their research facilities. So things have changed. A lot of rules and regulations are in place now that haven't been there before. So we can feel more confident about the information that's coming out from the medical sector of our government. And I just want to leave people with 3 asks. One is that you stay informed, because a common thread with all of these participants who are taken advantage of is that they were targeted because investigators knew they were uninformed and that they were not going to seek medical information, and that they would not advocate for themselves. So if you do not trust the CDC, maybe you'll trust the National Medical Association's website, or go to blackdoctors.org or some similar website where you can get information that you will not feel that is too heavily influenced by political interest. Talk to your providers. Make sure you have a doctor that you can trust. Make sure that you're not going to the urgent care and the ER for all your care, so that you don't have a relationship with someone. Go to a physician that you trust. Make sure that person validates your concerns. It is reasonable to have skepticism. Let that person make you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable or they're dismissive, move on. Move on. There are plenty of other options out there for you as far as primary cares or other physicians. And let's not be a repeat of Tuskegee. Tuskegee was able to happen by people not getting treatment. And we saw what ended up happening to these young men because of lack of treatment. We're just like Dr. Coker said, we are creating a space here in that line. Please show up so that we do not get left behind in this crisis. And lastly, there's a word that one of the Native American physicians brought up during his talk. It was a panel that was held earlier this week. And the word is sagoli, and that's their way of greeting one another in their tribe. And it means, I see you. It's more than just hello. It's, we see you, we hear you, we are here for you. We are fighting for members of our community.
Thank you. Oh, I was doing well until you got to that part. Okay, so we are running out of time and you guys are still hanging in there. So we're going to skip one part of what we were going to talk about, and we're going to go into questions in the chat box. So if you could bring up the panel for us, and let's get the coalition involved, and let's start going through some of these questions, because everyone is kind enough to hang in there, because these are very important conversations. And Dr. McIntosh, I can't thank you enough for reviewing our storied history and giving validation to those that have joined us for this very reason. And the skepticism is real. We see it, we feel it, and we know it, and we validate your concerns, and we're here for you. And we're even taking the vaccine for you so that you can see that we are okay and you will be okay. But let's go through the questions. Question number 1, please.
First question these questions have been kind of capsulized. One of the popular topics, allergies. Many have reported allergies and concerned about the side effects of those allergies. Which allergy sufferers should not take the vaccine, if any? Thank you.
Great question. So when we talk about the allergies again, many of us suffer from allergies. I mean, many of us are taking allergy shots for our allergies. So please understand that right now, the analysis that's been done is because there is anaphylaxis due to allergy to a vaccine. So if you've had a vaccine in the past, hepatitis, any of them, DPT, tetanus, any vaccine that you've had an anaphylactic reaction, not a rash, not I felt like I got the flu from the flu shot. No, throat is closing, tongue is swelling, full body rash, chest tightening, and emergency medical attention was required, possibly hospitalization. You right now are not in line for the vaccine, and you're going to contact your primary care doctor. You're going to talk with your allergist if you have one, and we can certainly do chemical patch testing on you to figure out what chemical in that vaccine rendered you an anaphylactic reaction. So right now, if you just have garden variety allergies, bee stings, peanuts, crabs, shellfish, we get it. You can still get in line. That's not you. Next question.
Dr. Coker, this is
Yes.
Dr. Lee. So I'm one of those patients. I had an anaphylactic reaction to lisinopril, had to be in the hospital for 2 days, completely different medication. And so what I did was I went online to see what the ingredients were in this vaccine, and I saw that there wasn't any overlap with my medication. So that's actually not a absolute contraindication right now, anaphylaxis, but they have to make sure that you have not had a reaction to the same medications. And so what I also did was I told the person that was injecting me prior to getting the vaccine, hey, I've had this reaction. So not only go to a site that's able to take care of you, but your obligation is to tell the person, hey, I have had an allergic reaction before, so please monitor me more closely, and they will. So everyone else was required to be monitored for 15 minutes, and I had to be monitored for 30 minutes. So we don't want anyone right now not getting vaccinated because they've had an allergic reaction. So your job is to talk to your doctor now. Do your research, because when your time comes, it might be a while before the vaccine comes back up to you. So you can't wait until then to ask your doctor, should I get it or should I not get it? This is the time that you need to be asking your doctor if your previous allergy anaphylaxis will preclude you from getting the vaccine.
And let it be noted that all vaccine sites have safety precautions in place to monitor you, to be ready to do whatever is necessary for you to, in case you get a reaction. So that's important to know.
Yes. Is there another question from the coalition?
Yes, there is, Dr. Coker. And these sets of questions were earlier on in the presentation, so folks may be feeling differently now that you all spoke. But there was a trend around questions around why not wait for a while to take the vaccine? There was a lot of uncertainty shared in questions, again, like not trusting the trials. But generally the questions were, what is the harm in me waiting, maybe 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from now, and to wait and to see the reactions of others?
Dr. Guy, you want to take that one? Because that's right under scarcity.
Sure. So as we have already discussed, Dr. Teal hit it on the nail. This vaccine is scarce. We don't have enough doses as of now. That's why all states, including Delaware, have created a triage system, which will start with residents of long-term care facilities, healthcare workers, and then moving down to chronic patients with people with chronic illnesses and those over 65, and moving down to the general population. Right now, there's not enough vaccine for even those of the first part of the pyramid, the top of the pyramid. So this vaccine is scarce. So when it's your turn to get the vaccine, you need to be ready after reviewing the information. Hopefully we provided some more scientific knowledge here. We've talked about some of the emotional issues we have too with, our history about, vaccine hesitancy, based, Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks cells. So we hope that with looking at the science and continue to look at the science, that you will not have vaccine hesitancy and you'll be able to get this scarce resource. Black and brown communities are a vulnerable community. We've had disproportionate infection and death from COVID-19. We have more chronic illness. We may be in, our socioeconomic structures where we may be more front-facing. We may be more frontline workers. So it's important that when it's your turn, hopefully we can reduce your vaccine hesitancy. Please talk to your healthcare providers or those you trust. So hopefully they can improve your vaccine, can decrease your vaccine hesitancy if you're one of those that has that. Because you might not be around to get the vaccine. You might get back in the line if you don't get in the line first. Like if you're a healthcare worker or you're a person with chronic illness, the line you may be far back in the line. And this illness is not, we want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our communities. We want to protect Delaware. We want to protect the whole world. This is one of the tools in the toolbox. It's a great tool.
Yeah, if I may, Dr. Coker, let me just put it in perspective. We're talking about the vaccine today. Let us not forget that we've seen some of the highest peaks of infectivity and deaths this very past week. And we can anticipate that while we are starting to, feverishly try to vaccinate people, at the same time, this COVID vaccine is spreading. And the most recent predictive model from Johns Hopkins University, they had been anticipating that we would have 500,000 deaths by April 1st of 2021. And now they're predicting that we'll have 562,000 deaths. So an additional 60,000 deaths just based on infectivity over these holidays. So I think to Dr. Guy's point, it's really important for everyone to understand today, seek more knowledge from what you've heard today. And if you have your opportunity to be able to get the vaccine, especially if you are a frontline worker, you are someone who is at greatest risk, you really should consider taking advantage of getting that vaccine today.
Right, and as Dr. Teal said, just to piggyback on to Dr. Teal's excellent points, please, in the meanwhile, keep your mask on. When you've had your vaccine, keep your mask on. And after that, keep your mask on till we determine that it's okay to take it off. It's not okay to take it off, even if you've been vaccinated at this point in time.
Correct.
And may I add also that Dr. Teal also said about going out, speaking with your provider, your doctor, and one of the comments were, my doctor is not a COVID expert. So what we're here to do is to deliver this information to you and to realize that many of us have taken the vaccine because we trust the system, and we also want to live by example and to let you know that it is safe and to let you realize that there are many who may not get the vaccine just because they're of the scarcity until 6 months from now. But you still need to stay safe. And you still need to do all the things that we need to do. One of the things that we also want to add is that if you have had COVID vaccine within the past 3 months, you may not be going to the front of the line because you may still have some immunity from if you've had COVID within the past 90 days. But realize that you still need a vaccine because, as Dr. Corbett from NIH said, the vaccine is guaranteed immunity. It's going to give you that immunity where the COVID infection, that immunity may wax and wane and slowly go away over time. So you need this vaccine eventually, just not within the 90 days if you've had a recent COVID infection.
And I want to mention that it's such a scarce resource that some of my colleagues have been receiving phone calls saying, can I pay for a vaccine? Mm-hmm. We've been fighting so that the vaccine is equitably distributed to all of us, and so that only the rich won't be the ones that are able to afford this vaccine. So we're at the table fighting for you, making sure that you're able to access the vaccine. And there's so much hesitancy among our population, but other communities, they're trying to pay to get the vaccine right now. So we're just urging you guys to please take the vaccine if your time in line comes up.
Yes,
Perfect.
yes, we are fighting for this scarce resource. Throughout this pandemic, there's been scarce resource. It started out with personal protective equipment being a scarce resource. Healthcare workers could not obtain it originally. And then ventilators. And I'm told ventilators were not a problem in Delaware at all. And they've been, that problem has been different. But even on a webinar just last week, the president of the American Association of Black Nurses talked about in some parts of the country, we're still rationing, we are rationing critical care.
Yes. Is there another question? Thank you all.
Yes, good afternoon. This question is regarding the timing and the rollout of the vaccine. Someone in the chat put, what about our children? When will the vaccine be available to our children?
Well,
Great
there were no children included. There were a few children between 12 and 16 included in the trials, but there were very few. And so the recommendations is until there's a phase 3 trial, including children, the recommendation is that they will not be put forth to kids because it hasn't really been tried, and you do need to still go through the standard phase trials before you can make that recommendation for children, making sure that there's no side effects or adverse effects, and that the dosing, all those things need to be thought out and researched and go through trials before recommended for kids.
Right, and there was also some ethical discussion about giving a vaccine to children when a minor can't really consent to an emergency use authorization vaccine, which really has not been licensed yet. So there was a lot of, I'm not a pediatrician, but there was a lot of ethical discussion around that point.
And you still have to remember, these vaccines are still in phase 3 trial. This is our emergency use only. And so we still, even after getting the vaccine, you will be monitored. You will still be monitored and followed for the effects of that vaccine for up to 2 years. And
the CDC is sending, the CDC has already sent my V-Safe update. When you get your vaccine, you'll register on your, your cell phone, where they'll send you a message every day for the first week to ask you if you had any side effects, and they'll give you numbers to call if you do, and you also should call your healthcare provider, but they have numbers to call also, and they'll monitor you. Then they'll send you a text out. They said 3 months, 6 months, all the way up through the year.
Okay, and I just saw a quick question, two that are important. One from one of my sources down in Baltimore, Judy Fitzgerald. Judy said, did I hear you correctly when you said if you have COVID, then you don't need to get the vaccine? No, what Dr. Scantlebury was saying was that if you've recently had COVID, right now it looks like you've got about 90 days possibly of immunity. But if your number comes up, and they call you for vaccination and you are not symptomatic with COVID, you can absolutely get the vaccine, because this immunity that you get from the vaccine is far greater than that which they're seeing with the virus being in your system. The next question that I saw that a lot of people are asking, Dr. McIntosh, we need you back up, talking about those that are pregnant.
Right.
And the possibility of the vaccine. And I saw Dr. Smith out in California put something in the chat regarding a follow-up to that as well. Dr. McIntosh?
So right now, pregnancy is not a contraindication to getting the vaccine. Although pregnant women were not specifically studied in the trials, there's no reason to believe that it's harmful to give this to pregnant patients, especially those who are in high-risk categories, meaning they're healthcare workers or frontline workers, or if they have a lot of comorbid or other medical problems that put them at risk for having COVID, meaning diabetes or obesity. So right now, the recommendation is to talk to your provider and do a risk assessment with your provider and determine whether or not you could wait or should wait, or whether or not you really should go for the vaccine now during your pregnancy. Also, if you receive the first shot and then you get pregnant, you should definitely go ahead and have your second shot. If you're thinking about getting pregnant, you should still get the vaccination when your number's up and you can get that vaccination. Do not withhold getting pregnant. Do not withhold getting the vaccine because of pregnancy. And we have members of ACOG, which is our think tank in the OBGYN community. They are on the advisory panel for our immunization practices. So we are staying right there at the forefront of the information, and everything looks like it's okay to be vaccinated when you're pregnant.
Okay, we're almost at the 4:30 mark. Let's take one more question.
All right, the question is, will we need to take the vaccine annually like we are now doing the flu shot?
That is the $10 million question. Great question. I think the jury is still out, as I understand it. I think it's going to take us all that have gotten vaccinated early, answering to VSafe, to talk about how we're feeling. There probably will be a serum antibody study to determine whether that will be necessary. So the jury is still out, but we are all prepared in our minds that we may need a booster to get on the other side of this. This is a very smart virus. It has a tendency to reinvent itself, as you can see what's going on in Europe right now. So as soon as you think you're smarter than the disease, that's when you get burned. So the jury is still out. And if any other panelists want to weigh in, I think the more we continue to conversate about those of us that have gotten the vaccine, information will be critical for them to make that determination.
And those clinical trials are still going on right now. And that's the main reason, is that they really want to see how long the antibodies are going to last in those individuals. I saw a question about why was it not officially approved by the FDA? And that's largely because they typically don't approve medications until they're at the end of the trials. But because the pandemic is so great, they've been able to see that the vaccine was safe. And so not giving the vaccine outweighed the risk of giving the vaccine that was shown to be safe and effective. And so that's the reason why it technically hasn't been approved by the FDA. And so they will continue to monitor the participants in the clinical trial, as well as the recipients who've already received the vaccine for a long time.
And
Right.
there are a few questions out there about why should we trust this vaccine? Why should we trust it? I have not taken it, and it's been developed in 7 months. There's not enough in Black people in terms of the trial. And, first of all, let's remember, it's hard to get people of color into a clinical trial. So the low numbers speak for our own reluctance in terms of wanting to enroll in a study. And so the more we're willing to get into studies, the more participants, and there's still ongoing studies out there. And secondly, realize that getting a vaccine is not just about you, it's about your communities, but doing something to prevent disease from spreading, not just for yourself, but for those loved ones around you who can't be in that space. And so it's important to think beyond yourself when you're thinking about getting this vaccine. What's worse than not getting this vaccine? Getting COVID disease and perhaps dying. And so that's the alternative. You have to weigh the risk benefits. What happens if you don't get the vaccine and get COVID and don't do well with COVID? So we have, as Dr. Teal said, the numbers are increasing. We are in a pandemic that's getting worse, and we're spiking again. So we have to do our part, and many of us have gotten the vaccine.
Right. And as Dr. Lee said, the vaccine trials are ongoing. The FDA has required that the companies who received emergency use authorization for vaccine must still continue what we call phase 4, look for at least a minimum of 2 years. So we'll have answers to these questions as we move forward. They'll be looking at all these questions. Can people do we need a booster? Do the antibody levels go down to a level where you can get reinfected? Those questions take time. We don't know that yet because we haven't gotten that answer. The time has not been there to find those answers yet.
Perfect. I want to take a moment to just thank the panel. I mean, these are doctors in this community that I knew I could count on because we have always spoken truth to power. We have relationships with our patients. We have relationships with our community. And I thank you for your honesty, your integrity, your research, and taking the time to give back to the community as you all have always done. More importantly, I want to thank Ray Jones Avery and the National Coalition of 100 Black Women for not taking this subject for granted and working really hard to get meaningful information out to the community. please understand that we're not going away. This is mission number 2. And as soon as we get vaccine number 2, we're coming back and we're going to keep talking and we're going to keep having this conversation. And when we watched the other night, they said trust, education, and accessibility are the 3 pillars of getting on the other side of this pandemic. Vaccines don't save lives. Vaccinations do. We all got a shot of hope. And we are going to work like the Dickens to get you that same shot of hope, because that's what it felt like going in. It felt like hope. We could breathe again. We feel like, yep, we may get ill, but it may not take us out. And it helps us practice medicine and take care of you very differently. And we want you to have that same decreased level of fear. So we're going to work with the clergy in our community. We're going to work with the physicians, and we're going to continue to have this meaningful dialogue with you, because it's just so necessary. And Ray, I know you're there. If you would jump on, and thank you everyone for hanging in there. You guys on a Sunday afternoon, you are right there with us to the end. You're awesome. Thank you for hanging in there. And many of you ask, well, can we get some notes on this? This will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can send it out to your friends, run it 5 ways, rewind it if you need to listen to us explaining something differently again. And so we don't have notes for this, but this is a recorded session and it will be uploaded to YouTube for each of you to take the time to look at as often as you'd like. Hey, there's Ray.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, each one of you that has joined this, this important forum. A special thanks to our sister docs, the Color COVID Commission. Your leadership is priceless. We are so grateful. Again, this programming has been made possible by Newcastle County CARES Act funding, the state of Delaware, and AARP Delaware. This program has been made possible because you took the time to register and to join us and to spend time with us. Certainly there are many questions that have been answered and other questions that remain. We will follow up in February as more information becomes available. Please visit www.beyondthemask.info and stay informed because the information is changing. We will be posting updates there. Would you please post up the survey? Yes, Doctor in the chat, it says Dr. Coker needs a show. Yes, she does. And I'm her agent, so you can contact me. If you would please quickly do the post poll. And again, on behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Delaware Chapter, our officers and our entire membership, we are so appreciative for each one of you. Flux Communications, thank you for being our backbone tech team.
Thank you, Flux.
Thank you to our chat moderators, Dr. Doris Griffin, Tamara Smith, and Monica Porter.
Ray, you guys have got some upcoming events. Is that right?
Yeah, he's going to post them up as soon as he posts the survey results. Thank you for that prompt, Dr. Coker. This is a series on December 22nd. We will present Chasing Away the Corona Blues. We have all been under a great deal of stress. We are grieving. This is a season for weeping and mourning, and we want to have an opportunity for our community to give voice to what you're going through. So that all these are available to the public. The www.buytickets@ncbwde, you can get registered. Do you have the poll results?
I can't Can't wait to see this. Yeah, we're up.
You're up by 62%.
You guys are awesome. Let's go.
Thank you. And again, everyone at the end of the day makes your own choice in consult with your healthcare provider and your God. So people that decide to take the vaccination or to decide to take the vaccine to become vaccinated, it doesn't make you Uncle Tom or a sellout. And those that decide not to, it doesn't make you a conspiracy theorist or ignorant. We have to do what is best for us. But we thought it was absolutely our responsibility or our obligation to bring you factual scientific information from professionals. And we think we've done a great job. We think, I think that you all have done a great job. We know that we have to continue the conversation. Okay, so we see the results. And can you post up the two upcoming events, or the three, and then we'll let everybody go. Please take a look at the credits on the roll, so we have all the names of everyone. This does not happen with just a few people, quite a few people. Cassandra.
Yes.
Do you want to underscore anything from a state government perspective?
I just want to say thank you. This conversation was amazing. I'm a public health professional, and I learned so much during this discussion. I want to just give gratitude to the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and also this esteemed group of Black women doctors who took their time to actually step out and step in to provide us this wonderful forum to continue the conversation and to help protect our communities. I can't express enough gratitude.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, so again, you all have a wonderful, safe holiday. Rest up for the next leg of the journey for 2021. We hope to see you on December 22nd, December 29th, and in the new year. You can roll the credits.
Everybody.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks, everybody.
ladies.
Thanks, Jen.
Everyone, take care.
Thanks.